Tonight, beneath London's leaden sky, a single decree in Aylesworth House threatens to bind a young woman's future in silk and chains. The betrothal is announced, the candles flare, and the storm answers. By dawn, her bed lies untouched, a slipper cool by the hearth, a letter half burned, and whispers coil through the corridors. Duty, betrayal, a stranger with a ghost-pale face waiting at the gates. Her secret is about to surface, one that pits honor against longing and summons a buried past to haunt the present. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, city and country, and share. What captivates you most about period romances? Forbidden love, court intrigue, or a heroine's hard-won freedom? London, year of our Lord, 1593. Within the cold grandeur of Aylesworth House, where tapestries whispered secrets from stone walls and the air always seemed scented with dust and silence, a decision was made that would shift the fate of a young woman's life. The rain had not yet begun to fall, but the clouds that gathered above London bore the weight of something more than weather. Lady Margaret Harrow, 21 years of age, stood in the centre of the great hall, her back impossibly straight despite the tide of dread rising in her chest. Her gown, of deep forest green velvet trimmed with gold embroidery, shimmered faintly in the late afternoon light. She wore pearls in her hair, placed there not by her own hand, but by a trembling maid who dared not meet her eyes. Around her neck hung a single cameo brooch, its frame a delicate oval of ivory and gold, the likeness of a mother long dead, pressed against her heartbeat. Before her, the Duke of Aylesworth, her father, paced the marbled floor like a man sharpening a blade. His voice was level, but beneath it ran the chill of steel. "You shall be wed to Lord William Darnell before the new moon," he announced, as though sealing a trade. "The match secures land, gold, and the Queen's continued favour. It is done." Margaret did not speak. She did not move, but inside her something ancient and unyielding shifted. It was not surprise, no. The expectation of such a fate had shadowed her since girlhood. It was something else, something darker, a quiet revolt. The Duchess, her mother, stood by the window with hands clasped tight at her waist. Her gown of plum satin was rich and elegant, yet the woman inside it looked frail, like parchment that had once been strong, but had since endured too many winters. She spoke softly. "Will she be permitted to speak her mind, Edmund?" The Duke turned. "A mind is not what is required of her, Sibylla. Only her name, her womb, her obedience." It was then that Margaret looked at her father fully. Her eyes, those strange storm-colored eyes she had inherited from her grandmother, did not glisten. They froze. She curtsied, deep and deliberate, then rose with the elegance of one trained to be admired, never truly seen. "As you wish, my lord," she said, and then, "May I take the air before supper?" The Duke waved her away like a servant. She passed through the long corridors, past servants who lowered their heads, past portraits of forgotten Harrows with empty eyes. She did not cry, not even when she reached the rose garden where her childhood dreams had once taken root. The petals were beginning to blacken with the first drops of rain. The scent of the earth rising was sweet, almost cruelly so. That night, the storm came. The rain fell in torrents, lashing the windows of Aylesworth House like an angry god's fingers. Thunder rolled low and long above the chimneys, and candle flames bowed to the wind that snuck through old glass. By the time the house slept, Margaret was already gone. Her bed remained undisturbed, the covers folded with meticulous precision. One slipper left behind near the hearth. A single sheet of parchment, half-burned, sat curled within the embers, the handwriting elegant, the words unreadable. The Duke rose before dawn, roused by a maid's shriek and the clamour of cold silence in his daughter's chamber. He said nothing as he stared at the empty space where she had once slept. The Duchess clutched a rosary so tightly the beads cut into her palm. "She has been taken," the Duke said at last, "or worse." He turned to the captain of his household guard. "No one speaks of this. You will send men, quietly. Search every alley, every dock, every convent if you must. I will not have scandal in my house. She is ill. That is what they shall say." He looked to his wife, who had not moved. "Do you understand me, Sibylla?" But the Duchess did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on the window, on the black horizon, on something only she could see, and thus the house of Harrow began to crumble, not with blood or fire, but with silence, lies, and the hush of a velvet slipper left behind in the night. The storm raged, and beneath its cry the streets of London swallowed a secret they were not yet ready to reveal. The city of London, under the grey shroud of dawn, wore a silence far older than its stones. Beneath the groaning beams of taverns and the soot-draped towers of churches, something stirred, an unease that no bell had told, yet every heart seemed to feel. It was not only the rain that lingered, it was a question, soft as mist and sharp as steel. Where is the Duke's daughter? The tale travelled fast. It slipped past palace gates and crept through fish markets. It passed from lips damp with ale to the hushed corners of silken drawing rooms. No one claimed to know the truth, but everyone had a version of it. Some said she had run off with a lover, others whispered of pirates or plague, of spells cast by secret Catholics in revenge. A few, bolder still, claimed to have seen her wandering the streets barefoot in her nightgown, weeping like a ghost bride. But in a shadowed corner of Southwark, beneath the slanted roof of an apothecary long abandoned, sat a man who knew the truth and wished he did not. Adrian Blackwell, once a captain in the Queen's army, now barely a name, kept to the shadows. His back rested against the crumbling stone wall, his cloak drawn up against the chill. A hood concealed most of his face, but nothing could truly hide the long, pale scar that ran from the corner of his brow to the edge of his cheek. It glowed faintly whenever the light struck it, like a wound that refused to forget. His eyes, however, were what betrayed him most. Hazel, deep-set and restless. They did not scan the room. They studied, measured, remembered. Before him, the street bustled, slowly, uncertainly. Carts rolled by with wheels slick from the night's rain. A flower seller set out her wares with trembling fingers. Smoke curled from chimneys, clinging low to the rooftops, as if London itself did not wish to be seen today. Adrian's fingers closed around the chain tucked beneath his shirt. It was thin, iron and plain, but at the end of it hung a ring, gold, women's, small. He did not look at it. He never did, but he felt its weight and it burned like a question. Footsteps neared, not hurried, not loud, just steady. Adrian did not move. He did not need to. The man who stopped before him had a presence that belonged to another world entirely. Brother Thomas had once been the royal physician, before age, conscience and disappointment had led him into monastic silence. His robe was worn, his beard white, and his eyes were the only thing about him untouched by time. They were calm, like the center of a storm. "I was told I'd find you here," he said, his voice a whisper that still managed to cut through the morning. "You always know where to find me," Adrian replied, his voice low, scraped raw at the edges. Brother Thomas studied him. "You've heard the news?" Adrian gave a slight nod. "They say she vanished. They say many things." "What do you say?" Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the river where fog drifted like a procession of ghosts. "I say I found her," he said at last. "I say she was drugged, bound, and left in a hunting lodge, like a piece of forgotten game." Brother Thomas sat beside him on the stone. "And yet you do not return her. She doesn't want to go back." "Did she say that?" Adrian hesitated. "Not in words, but I've seen her eyes." That was enough. The monk was silent for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "Do you think you were the only one who came back from war bearing scars?" Adrian said nothing. His hand still gripped the chain. "She is not yours to keep, Adrian. She is not yours to protect. But perhaps, you were hers to find." Those words struck deeper than any blade. Adrian's breath caught just for a moment. Brother Thomas rose slowly. His knees groaned in protest, but his voice remained firm. "If you leave her in the shadows," he said, "the light will never find her again, and you will have condemned not just her fate, but your own." He walked away without another word. Adrian stayed still for a long time. He listened to the fog, the bells, the murmurs of a city that had never cared if he lived or died. He had no love for the court, no loyalty left to the crown. What they had done to him, stripped of rank, forgotten, cast aside for speaking against the nobleman whose cruelty had cost a dozen lives, it could not be undone. But her, Margaret Harrow, daughter of a man who played power like a chess game, had looked at him, truly looked at him, and had not flinched. She had screamed yes when he had first entered that room and cut her ropes. She had fought him, clawed and cursed him. But once he had spoken her name, once she had seen the mark of the Queen's army on his belt, she had gone quiet. Not docile, not grateful, just quiet, like a woman who had finally found the edge of the cage. And when he had carried her, too weak to walk, through the woods and across the frozen river to safety, she had said one word, not thank you, not why. She had said, don't leave. He had promised he wouldn't, and now here he was, sitting in the damp cold, hiding in alleyways, pretending that promise meant nothing. Adrian stood. His body protested, an old wound in his side, never stitched clean, pulled against the cold, but he moved with purpose. He disappeared into the fog, the city swallowing him whole. Hours later, beneath the low eaves of an abandoned chapel at the edge of the woods, a small fire crackled. Margaret sat near it, wrapped in a blanket of worn wool, her hair unbound and damp from the mist. Her gown, no longer silk but a rough homespun dress, did not suit her, yet she wore it with the same quiet dignity. She was reading, a book of Psalms lent by Brother Thomas, but her eyes did not move across the page. The door creaked. She looked up. He stood there, drenched and silent, his hood down, his eyes darker than the room. She did not speak. He stepped forward, removed his cloak, placed it on the back of the chair, and then he knelt. "I was wrong to wait," he said. "And I was wrong to think you would ever be safe in the hands of men like him, or me." Margaret rose slowly, her expression unreadable. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he added, "only your trust." She walked toward him. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing like a heartbeat. When she reached him, she stopped, not touching, not smiling, just standing there, her gaze steady, her breath calm. "You never asked me what I want," she said. He met her eyes. "What do you want, my lady?" Her voice did not tremble. "To not be a secret, and to not be saved by someone who wishes to disappear." Silence fell between them. Then, slowly, he stood. And in that small chapel, lost to time with nothing but firelight and fog between them, a vow was made, not in words, but in the space between breath and gaze. Tomorrow would come. The world would demand its price. But for now, in this moment, they were not Duke's daughter and disgraced soldier. They were simply two souls caught in the same storm, and neither was ready to let go. The city stirred beneath a curtain of ash-colored light. London, ever cloaked in its own secrets, awoke slowly to the rhythm of cartwheels groaning over cobblestones, to church bells trembling in the damp air, and to rumors that twisted through the alleys like ivy in search of truth. Aylesworth House loomed like a wounded lion at the edge of Westminster, majestic, immovable but silent in a way that unsettled even its own walls. The tapestries that once echoed the Harrow name now shivered with the hush that follows shame. Inside, servants moved with caution. The Duke's fury lingered in every corridor, his wrath delivered in glances, in slammed doors, in the cold absence of his daughter's name from any conversation. And though no announcement had been made, the absence of Lady Margaret was no longer a secret. It had become a presence, a weight. Her missing footsteps, her still chamber, the untouched breakfast tray. It was as though the house itself mourned. The gates had remained closed to all strangers until that morning. He appeared just after sunrise. The guards at the lower gate were the first to see him. A tall figure wrapped in a long black cloak, the hood casting a deep shadow over his face. He did not approach with urgency nor with hesitation. His steps were deliberate, as though he had walked this path in dreams. His hands were gloved, and in one he held a letter, sealed with red wax, bearing no crest. The man said nothing at first, only waited, silent, still. When one of the younger guards stepped forward and caught sight of the scar that ran down the stranger's face, he gasped audibly. Another crossed himself. "It's a ghost," one whispered. "No," said the other. "It's the man who never died." The older guard, less prone to superstition, took the letter and sent word to the Duchess's private quarters. Within the hour, he was admitted. Adrian removed his hood as he stepped into the marble vestibule, but not his cloak. The silence of the house pressed in from all sides. He did not glance at the portraits or the grand staircase. He knew exactly where he was going. He was led to a narrow corridor behind the east wing. The air here was heavier, filled with lavender and coal smoke. A maid opened a door quietly, and Adrian stepped into the Duchess's private receiving room. Lady Sibylla Harrow, cloaked in deep plum and seated beside a small writing desk, did not rise. But her eyes, dark, weary, and sharp, met his immediately. "I knew the letter was from you," she said softly. "I knew the moment I saw the seal." Adrian inclined his head. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, my lady." She studied him in silence. "Then you were one of the Queen's men once, were you not?" "I was. And now I am what remains." The Duchess stood slowly, her movements graceful, precise. She looked older than her years, yet there was strength in the way she held herself, like a branch that had bent under many storms but never snapped. "My daughter," she said. Adrian's voice was low. "She is alive and safe." The Duchess closed her eyes, just for a moment. Her hand trembled where it rested on the back of the chair. "She was held in a lodge near the northern border of your hunting grounds," he continued. "Drugged, watched, not by bandits, but by paid men, uniformed, obedient." She opened her eyes. "Who sent them?" Adrian hesitated only a moment. "Lord William Darnell." The Duchess's expression did not change, but her breath did. Sharp, swift, a hand pressed to her chest. "I believe," he continued, "his intention was to stage a rescue, to present himself as her savior, to claim gratitude and obedience where he had no right to either." Sibylla turned away, walking toward the window. The morning fog pressed against the glass like a ghost pleading entry. "I suspected something was wrong," she whispered. The haste of the betrothal, the Duke's sudden alliance with Darnell. There were rumors of debts, political ones, but I did not know. She turned back to him. "Why did you help her?" Adrian answered with something between a breath and a confession. "Because no one else would." She stepped closer. For a moment she seemed to truly see him, the scar, the silence in his eyes. "She trusts you." "I believe so. She is unharmed. Not in body, and in spirit." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That will take time." The Duchess reached into her sleeve and withdrew a small silver crucifix. She placed it on the desk between them. "What do you want from me, Captain Blackwell?" He looked down at the crucifix, then at her. "I want safe passage. For her. For me, I want no soldiers sent, no search parties. I want silence until she decides to return of her own will." "You ask me to lie to my husband?" "No, my lady, I ask you to protect your daughter." The room fell into silence, a long, trembling silence. Then the Duchess walked to a locked cabinet and removed a folded parchment. She pressed her signet ring into a blank space, sealing it anew. "Show this to any man who stops you in the Duke's name. It will buy you time, not much, but enough." Adrian took it without a word. "She will return," he said at last, "but only when she is ready, not before." The Duchess walked to him, slow and steady, and placed a hand over his gloved one. "If you fail her," she said, voice shaking, "I will find you, and it will not be a priest I send." Adrian nodded. There was no need to promise what had already been written across his soul. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "She misses you," he said, without turning back. And then he was gone. The servants watched from behind curtains and pillars as the ghost walked once more through the halls of Aylesworth House. They did not speak. They did not breathe. The gates opened. He passed through, and as the heavy iron bars closed again, a gust of wind swept through the courtyard, lifting dead leaves into a spiral. The Duchess remained by the window long after he disappeared from view. Her fingers traced the outline of the crucifix on the desk. Her shoulders stiffened. Her lips moved in a prayer that never made it to voice. Upstairs, in Margaret's abandoned chamber, a maid carefully folded the last of the silk gowns into a chest. A single slipper remained by the fireplace, untouched. Outside, the fog thickened. London held its breath. And somewhere, between one heartbeat and the next, a reckoning began to stir. The wind that moved through the northern woods was a lonely wind. It crept through broken branches and whistled through the narrow chimneys of forgotten estates, curling like memory around stone and ash. Among the trees, long past the edge of the mapped lands, stood a ruined manor, half consumed by ivy and time. Its roof sagged in places, its windows long devoid of glass, replaced by rough-hewn shutters that moaned in protest each time they moved. It was here that Lady Margaret Harrow now lived, though no one would have recognized her. The gowns of velvet and lace had been replaced by a rough grey wool dress, hemmed poorly at the edges. Her hair, once a crown of auburn braids adorned with pearls, now hung in a simple plait down her back, often tucked beneath a worn linen cap. Her hands, unaccustomed to labor, bore the small red marks of cold water and coarse cloth. She scrubbed floors. She fetched firewood. She folded linen stiff with age. She swept the dust that never seemed to end. She did it all without complaint, but not without resentment. Each morning began the same. A fire to light, bitter tea to brew, silence to endure. Adrian Blackwell, her reluctant guardian, her captor-turned-savior, moved through the house like a ghost with weight. His presence filled every creaking beam, every corner of the abandoned drawing rooms, every flicker of candlelight that cast strange shadows along the cracked walls. He spoke little. When he did, it was in sentences short and dry, as if every word cost him something he did not wish to give. He slept in the upstairs hall, when he slept at all, and spent his days mending traps or chopping wood with an almost violent focus. At night, he disappeared into the woods, returning only at dawn, cloak damp with mist and face unreadable. Margaret watched him. She could not help it. Not because he inspired trust, he did not, nor affection, but because he was a question she could not stop asking with her eyes. Who was this man who bore the look of the dead, but moved like someone still carrying the weight of the living? He had never once touched her, never once entered her room or raised his voice, and yet his silence held more tension than any blow. She hated it, and yet not entirely. It was on the 9th night that she heard him cry out, a sound sharp and strangled, as if ripped from a place beneath the skin. The manor was dark. Only a single lantern flickered in the lower corridor. Margaret, seated by the hearth with a shawl around her shoulders, had been reading, though she could not remember a single word. The sound came again. She stood, slipped from the room. The stairs creaked beneath her feet. She followed the noise to the end of the hallway, where the narrow door stood ajar. Inside, Adrian lay on a straw mattress, tangled in blankets, drenched in sweat. His body jerked violently. His hand gripped the edge of the mattress as though trying to anchor himself to the waking world. "No," he gasped, barely above a whisper. "They're still inside." Margaret stepped in before hesitation could claim her. She knelt beside him and placed a hand on his brow. It burned. "Adrian," she said softly, "it's a dream, only a dream." His eyes flew open, unfocused, wild. "Get down," he rasped, reaching for a dagger that wasn't there. She took his face gently between her hands. "You're safe." "You're not there. It's me, Margaret." His breath came in ragged bursts. Slowly her voice reached him, his eyes focused. The tension in his limbs began to release. He closed his eyes, shame flooding his face. "I didn't mean—" "Hush," she said, dipping the cloth from the wash basin and pressing it to his brow. "You have a fever. You've been in the cold too long. You should have told me." "I'm fine." "You're not." He opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked. Her hair had fallen loose from its braid. Her cheeks were flushed from the fire. Her eyes, soft grey-green, met his without fear. "You're not afraid of me anymore," he murmured. "No," she said, not moving her hands. "Should I be?" He looked away. "You should fear what I've done, who I've been." "I do not live by shoulds, Captain Blackwell, not anymore." Silence stretched between them. She moved to rinse the cloth again, but his hand stopped her, lightly, just the brush of his fingers against her wrist. "I wasn't always like this," he said quietly. "There was a time I laughed. I had a horse, a silver ring. I was to marry a woman with wild hair and loud opinions." Margaret waited. "She died when her brother took the wrong side in a war. They hanged him, and her family with him. I tried to speak against it." His voice thickened. "I was told to be silent. I refused." "And they made you disappear?" "Yes." "And now?" she asked. He released her wrist. "Now I wait to stop running." She studied him in the dim light. He was younger than she had thought, not in years, but in something deeper, in the way his eyes pleaded not to be looked at too long. "You should rest," she whispered. He turned onto his side. "You shouldn't have come." "I didn't," she said softly. "I was taken, and then you brought me here, so I stayed." "And why do you stay now?" Her breath caught. The question, though simple, had more weight than she expected. She stood, gathered the cloth. "Good night, Captain." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her again. "Adrian." She turned. He looked at her through heavy lids. "When we are alone, call me Adrian." She nodded. "Good night, Adrian," and then she was gone. He lay there, eyes open, heart thudding against ribs that felt too tight. Down the corridor, Margaret returned to her room. She placed the cloth back in the basin and sat on the edge of her cot, her hands in her lap. She did not know what this place was. Not yet. Not a prison, not quite a home, but something in between. Something forged of quiet gestures, of truths told between broken dreams, of two souls learning not to fear the fire that flickered in each other's shadows. Outside, the forest breathed. The wind whispered not of danger, but of something else, something waiting. In the velvet-draped halls of Darnell House, where candelabras flickered against gilded mirrors, and the scent of lavender was too deliberate to be sincere, Lord William Darnell mourned. He wore the color of loss, with calculated grace, charcoal velvet with a black cravat, a sapphire brooch glinting at his throat like a tear made of stone. He received visitors in a drawing room, heavy with silk and silence, offering melancholy smiles and accepting condolences with a bowed head and damp eyes that never truly shone. "She was like a sister to me," said the Countess of Belgrave. "She was promised to be more," Lord Darnell replied, voice low, tender, rehearsed. Across London, society sighed for him. "Poor William," they murmured. "So noble, so patient, so terribly wronged." Ah, but within the stone walls of his private study, where no portraits dared to gaze down and the hearth always seemed to burn a little too hot, Lord Darnell was not mourning. He was planning. Atop his polished desk lay a collection of forged letters, parchment-stained and creased for realism, each one mimicking the fine hand of Lady Margaret Harrow. I cannot marry Lord Darnell. I'm not fit to carry the Harrow name. Forgive me, father. He read them with satisfaction, adjusting the curl of the letters, the smudge of ink. Each phrase had been chosen not to sound desperate, but ashamed. Not wild, but wounded. It was a delicate lie, one designed to preserve the Harrow name while ensuring Darnell emerged not as villain, but as victim. When the Duke of Aylesworth arrived, summoned, not invited, Darnell did not rise from his chair. "You came," he said simply, folding the last letter. "I wasn't certain you would." The Duke, still cloaked from the morning rain, removed his gloves with deliberate precision. His face, carved from stone and crowned with white hair, showed no emotion. "I assume you have not called me here to speak of grief," he said. Darnell offered a thin smile. "No, only of damage, and how to contain it." He slid the forged letters across the table. "Copies, of course. The originals are in a safer place. But I imagine you'll recognize the hand, your daughter's, or something very like it." The Duke did not touch the parchment. "What is it you seek?" "A wedding," Darnell said smoothly. "As planned, swift and unquestioned. Upon her return, no matter the circumstances, we restore her honor, we silence the whispers, and we solidify our alliance. And if I refuse," Darnell's gaze sharpened, "then London learns that Lady Margaret fled not in fear, but in disgrace. That she consorted with men of questionable background, that she dishonored your name and spurned the generosity of a nobleman who did nothing but love her." The fire crackled, the Duke's hands curled into fists. "You speak of generosity while holding forged letters like a dagger. Do not pretend to mourn what you were never promised, William." Darnell stood, his voice still calm, but laced now with steel. "I have power, Edmund. Perhaps not in your court, but in others. Your enemies are not mine. If I fall, I will take your name with me, and the Queen, bless her majesty, has little patience left for men who lose daughters and control." For a long moment the two men stared at one another, silence humming like a taut string between them. Then the Duke turned on his heel and left. He said nothing, but his steps echoed with fury. Back at Aylesworth House, the Duchess Sibylla stood at the window watching the rain trace soft rivers down the glass. She heard the front doors open. She heard them close again with thunderous weight. Her husband entered her solo without knocking. His face was pale, his eyes wild with something colder than grief. "What do you know?" he asked. She did not turn. "About what?" "About Darnell. About where she is. About the lie we're living." The Duchess finally turned, her face unreadable. "I know that our daughter is braver than you ever gave her credit for." He stepped forward, voice rising. "Do not test me, Sibylla." "I am long past the days of fearing you," she replied, voice low and firm. "And if you wish to save what remains of this house, you will stop listening to snakes in velvet." The Duke's hand twitched at his side, then dropped. "You defy me now too." "No, I mourn what we became." He stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time in years perhaps he did not know what to say. Meanwhile, far from the polish of London, in a clearing near the western woods, a man in a leather jerkin knelt by the riverbed. He had eyes like ice and hands too clean for the work he claimed to do. "Are you certain?" he asked the cloaked figure beside him. "She's been seen," the scout replied, "a woman matching her description, and a man, tall, scarred, moves like a soldier." The man nodded. "Blackwell. What now?" "We find the manor, we watch, we wait, and when we see her, take her. Burn the rest." The scout hesitated. "What if she fights?" "Then break her." By dusk, 3 riders moved westward, cloaks pulled tight, swords hidden beneath saddlebags. Behind them, smoke drifted faintly from Darnell House as the fire in Lord William's hearth consumed the practice copies of Margaret's forged letters. He had memorized every word. Back in her room, the Duchess lit a candle with hands that no longer trembled. She opened a drawer and took out a worn letter of her own, Margaret's handwriting real this time, its ink smudged from tears. She read it once more, and then she prayed, not for safety, but for courage, for her daughter, and for the ghost who stood between them and the flames that would surely come. The sky had not yet surrendered to morning when the wind changed. It whispered first through the trees with a breath both too warm and too dry. It stirred the ivy clinging to the broken stones of the abandoned manor, brushing against shutters like a warning too soft to be heard. Inside, Margaret stirred. She sat upright on her narrow cot, hair undone, breath catching in her throat as the air shifted. Something pressed against her chest, not a sound, but a sense, a knowing. She rose without lighting the candle and crossed to the window. The forest beyond should have been cloaked in mist, as it was every morning. But instead, there was a faint glow, flickering unnatural on the southern edge of the woods. A glow that moved, a glow that burned. Her lips parted. "Adrian!" She turned, already running barefoot down the corridor. He was not in his chamber, nor in the study. The main door hung slightly ajar, and through it the wind now carried not only heat, but smoke. She stepped out into the pre-dawn greyness and froze. In the clearing, silhouettes moved. 4 men cloaked in black, their faces half hidden beneath hoods. One poured oil across the threshold. Another held a torch, flame dancing like a serpent in the dark. "Stop!" she cried. They turned. The torch was thrown. The fire caught instantly, leaping like a beast across the dry beams of the doorframe. The manor groaned. Smoke billowed outward, swallowing stone and air. Margaret stumbled backward as the fire kissed the lintel above the door. Panic clawed at her throat, but something else pushed harder. Rage. "Where is he?" one of the men growled, advancing. She backed into the wall, searching for anything, a stone, a branch, a voice loud enough to summon the world. And then he appeared. Adrian, from the edge of the trees, soaked in dew and shadow. He saw the flames. He saw her. His eyes ignited, not with fear, but fury. He ran. The first man lunged at Margaret, only to be tackled mid-air by Adrian, who drove his shoulder into the attacker's chest and brought him crashing to the ground. A blade flashed. Adrian caught it with his forearm and drove his elbow into the man's jaw. Blood sprayed. Another attacker came from behind. Margaret screamed. Adrian turned just in time, taking the slash to the shoulder. He staggered. "Adrian!" She moved. Instinct led her hands. Her fingers found the hilt of the dagger Adrian had once placed on the table and told her never to touch. It now hung from his belt. She drew it. The third man grabbed her by the arm. She stabbed once, deep, through fabric and flesh. He howled. Adrian reached for her, pulling her close as the remaining men regrouped. "We have to run! The fire! There's no time!" He grabbed her hand, and they fled into the woods. Smoke followed, thick and choking. The air burned in her lungs. Behind them, the manor collapsed inward with a sound like a dying beast. They ran until her legs gave way, until she collapsed to her knees in the moss, trembling and soaked with sweat. Adrian knelt beside her, face pale, teeth clenched. Blood poured freely from his shoulder. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "I know. We need to stop it." He shook his head. "We keep moving. The monastery isn't far." She looked at him, her hands stained red, her breath catching in her chest. "I won't let you die." He met her gaze, eyes dark with pain but unwavering. "Then move." They did not speak again until the steeple appeared through the trees. Brother Thomas, already awake in prayer, opened the wooden doors and froze at the sight of them. Margaret, covered in ash and blood, and Adrian, barely standing. He ushered them in without a word. By the time Margaret had torn strips of cloth for bandages and heated water for washing, Adrian was already unconscious. "Lay him here," Brother Thomas said, motioning to a cot by the hearth. Margaret knelt at Adrian's side, cradling his head in her lap. His skin was cold. His lips trembled. "Talk to him," the monk said gently. "Call him back." Her hand moved to Adrian's chest, over the bloodied linen of his shirt. "You said you weren't mine to protect anymore," she whispered. "But what if I'm not ready to stop needing you?" She leaned down, her cheek brushing against his. Don't vanish. Not now. Not when I finally see you. A breath escaped him, shallow, but it came. His eyes fluttered. Her tears fell onto his jaw, soft and silent. Margaret, he rasped. I'm here. He moved his hand to hers, weak but certain. You're not mine, he said, eyes fluttering half-closed, but you're the only reason I come back. Her heart ached with something fierce and unfamiliar. Then come back, and stay. He nodded faintly, lips trembling between pain and something close to peace. Brother Thomas wrapped his wounds, applied salves, whispered prayers that floated like smoke toward the beams of the ceiling. Outside, the dawn finally broke, pale and gold, casting the sanctuary in light. Margaret sat by Adrian's side, hand in his, unmoving. She no longer trembled, she no longer feared. She only watched the light chase away the darkness from his face, and for the first time, she believed he would live. The day had not yet bloomed, but the palace already breathed with the quiet breath of dawn, maids brushing hearths in shadowed corners, guards shifting their weight on chilled marble floors, scribes whispering Latin prayers beneath breath sweetened with cloves. And yet there was tension in the air, an expectancy like the pause before a sentence too dangerous to finish. Whitehall, seat of Her Majesty's glory and dread, had never opened its gates for a woman like Sibylla Harrow under such circumstances. Not unannounced, not without a chaperone, not in a cloak the colour of mourning. But still, the gates had opened. The Duchess of Aylesworth, once the silent shadow beside a man of power, now walked alone through the gilded corridors of the Queen's private wing. Her steps were quiet, but her heart thundered beneath her bodice. She clutched a parcel to her breast, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with the ribbon from her daughter's last gift. A book of poetry. She had not been summoned. She had demanded nothing. She had simply asked. And Elizabeth Tudor, Queen of England, had said yes. The chamber was small by royal standards. No throne, only a high-backed chair of carved oak, and a table set with parchment and ink. The Queen stood by the window, unadorned, wrapped in a robe of deep blue. Her hair was loose, fire-red and streaked with silver, and her hands rested over the sill like those of a woman half listening to a confession from the wind. Sibylla curtsied deeply. She did not rise until told. "You may speak," the Queen said without turning. The Duchess's voice trembled at first. "Your Majesty, I come not for favour, only for truth." At that, Elizabeth turned, her eyes, dark as obsidian and twice as sharp, fixed on the woman before her. "You come as a mother," she said, "not as a wife. I come because silence is no longer survival." The Queen said nothing. Sibylla stepped forward and unwrapped the parcel. She placed upon the table three things: a torn letter in Margaret's hand, a set of forged documents traced with Darnell's seal, and a written confession, her own. The Queen's gaze moved over them like a falcon in flight. She read, she listened, she said little, but her stillness was more revealing than any speech. When the Duchess finished, silence filled the room like rising water. Elizabeth lifted her eyes. "Do you understand what this means?" "Yes, Your Majesty. If your daughter is found guilty of falsehood, she will be stripped of her name. If the man who helped her is proven a traitor, he will hang. And if you have lied to me, Sibylla Harrow, you will not see the inside of this palace again." "I understand." Elizabeth stared at her for a long moment, and then, with a single nod, said, "Summon them. Let truth walk into my court if it dares." The trial would not be public, but it would be heard. By nightfall, the word reached Aylesworth House, and it reached the Duke. He received the messenger in the West Wing, where candlelight cast his reflection across the swords of his ancestors. The letter trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear, but rage. "She dares go above me," he muttered. "She goes to the Queen behind my back." The messenger said nothing. The Duke crushed the paper in his fist. "Then she will learn what it means to be cast aside." He called for his steward. His voice carried, "Find Blackwell. Have him taken. Quietly, if possible. If not, He did not finish the sentence. Across the river, at the monastery, Margaret watched the moon rise above the chapel roof. Her gown was clean but plain, her hair braided simply down her back. Her face held the kind of stillness that comes only after fire, after running, after bleeding, after losing the last threads of childhood. Adrian sat near the hearth, his arm in a sling, his body worn but upright. His gaze flickered to her whenever she looked away. Brother Thomas entered quietly, carrying a scroll sealed with red wax. "It is from Her Majesty," he said. Adrian took it with his good hand. His eyes scanned the words once. "She's called us to court," he said. "The Queen." Margaret turned. "She knows," he nodded. "Everything." Brother Thomas's face was unreadable. "It is a risk. It's the only path left," Margaret said. Adrian looked at her. "You don't have to do this. We can leave. Now. Disappear." Margaret walked to him slowly, her voice low. "And live in fear, in silence?" "I would rather live in silence with you," he said. "But I cannot live without my name," she replied. "And you deserve more than a shadow's life." He reached for her hand. Their fingers met, tentative and warm. "If you walk into that court," he whispered, "they will judge every breath you take, every step you make, and I will be the wound they blame for your scars." She leaned closer, her forehead almost touching his. "Then stand with me, and let them see that I bleed by choice." The next morning, the Queen's coach arrived. No guards, only a single page and a letter bearing the royal seal. Margaret and Adrian stepped into the carriage together. She wore a gown of muted blue, modest and unadorned. He wore a dark coat over a white shirt, the collar clean but simple. They held hands, not tightly, but with quiet resolve. As the carriage moved toward Whitehall, London watched. Eyes behind shutters, murmurs on porches. The Duke's daughter rides with a ghost. The soldier returned from death. The scandal unfolds at court. Inside the palace, the Queen waited. Her council stood behind her like statues. The chamber was small, but the weight of judgment made the air heavy. Margaret stepped forward first. She did not bow. She curtsied deeply, then stood straight, chin high. "I am Margaret Harrow," she said, "daughter of the Duke. I have come to tell the truth." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Then speak it." And she did, without trembling, without shame. She told of the lodge, of the men sent to watch her, of Lord Darnell's plan, of Adrian's rescue, of the fire, of the choice to hide, of the decision to return. When she was done, silence fell. The Queen turned to Adrian. "Captain Blackwell," she said, "you were believed dead." "I was," he replied, "and yet you returned." "I had to." "Why?" His eyes met Margaret's. "Because she asked me not to leave." The Queen's gaze lingered on them both. Then she rose. "The court will deliberate," she said, "but I see no crime in love born from survival." Margaret did not breathe. Elizabeth walked to her, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Your name is not lost," she said, "but now it is your own." And then she turned to the guards. "Let the Duke be summoned, and let Lord Darnell prepare to answer." The Queen's voice rang clear through the chamber. "We do not burn women for fleeing cages, not anymore." Margaret closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she was not afraid. The sky over Whitehall Palace bore no sun that morning. A pale, iron-colored veil hung low, casting a cold hush over the courtyard, where the Queen's guards stood in rigid formation. The wind carried no scent of spring, no warmth of fire, only the scent of judgment. Within the palace walls, a silence deeper than decorum settled over the gathering. Nobles, ministers, and ladies, cloaked in fur, lined the narrow gallery of the Queen's private hall. Their whispers sharpened like daggers behind lace fans and silk gloves. There were no trumpets, no declaration of arrival. The trial would not be a spectacle, but it would be remembered. At the stroke of the 10th hour, the doors opened. 2 guards entered first, each bearing the crimson and gold insignia of the royal household. Between them walked Adrian Blackwell in chains. He wore no nobleman's coat, no medal, no crest. His shirt was white, but frayed at the cuffs. The sleeves rolled above the bandaged wound on his shoulder. His wrists were bound in iron, and though the shackles clanked with every step, his posture never faltered. His head remained high, his eyes, hollowed by pain and resolve, swept across the room without fear. The murmurs swelled. That's him, the soldier they left for dead, the one who stole the Duke's daughter, the ghost who defied the crown. But Adrian's eyes did not seek the crowd. They searched for one face, and though he did not find it, he knew she was there. Lady Margaret Harrow, veiled in pale grey, stood behind a row of courtiers near the west wall, hidden beneath the heavy drapery of the gallery. Her hands trembled beneath her gloves, but her spine remained unbent. She had watched him walk into fire once. Now she would watch him walk into judgment. At the far end of the chamber, beneath the golden crest of the Tudor rose, stood Queen Elizabeth I. Robed in deep emerald velvet embroidered with black pearls, her hair swept back beneath a diadem of silver, she sat on no throne, but a chair of carved oak and high back, symbol of justice, not majesty. Her expression was unreadable. She lifted one hand. "Let the charges be heard." A herald stepped forward, parchment in hand. Captain Adrian Blackwell, formerly of Her Majesty's Infantry, stands accused of sedition, false impersonation, unlawful interference in a noblewoman's affairs, and the kidnapping of Lady Margaret Harrow. A murmur rolled through the hall. Elizabeth did not blink. "Let the accuser speak." From the shadows, Lord William Darnell stepped forward, immaculately dressed in a black doublet with silver cuffs, a sapphire ring glinting on his finger. He bowed low before the Queen, but his eyes never left Adrian. "My Queen," he began, his voice smooth as polished stone, "I speak not from vengeance, but from grief. The woman I was to marry vanished weeks before our union. I believed her dead. Instead, I find she was taken, spirited away by a disgraced soldier who has no name, no station, and no cause to meddle in the affairs of the nobility." He turned to the room. "Captain Blackwell has made a mockery of justice, of duty. He has manipulated a frightened young woman, turned her against her family, her title, and the alliance that would have protected her." Adrian did not flinch. Darnell turned back to the Queen. "This man is no hero. He is a shadow, and shadows breed only doubt and danger." The Queen's eyes did not move. "And the accused?" Adrian stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was low but unwavering. "I did not take her," he said. "I found her, drugged, bound, guarded by men who carried Lord Darnell's sigil. She did not run to me. I carried her from the cage your court never questioned." A silence followed that no one dared fill. The Queen looked toward the gallery. Her gaze moved slowly until it paused. "Lady Margaret Harrow," she said, "if you are present, speak, or be silent, and let the crown decide in your absence." Margaret's breath caught. She had rehearsed this moment in dreams, in prayers, in sleepless nights where the firelight had flickered against her memory. But now, standing in the cold light of justice, her knees weakened, and yet she stepped forward. The crowd parted around her like water. Gasps followed her name, but she heard none of them. She moved to the center of the room, veil still lowered. Elizabeth watched her. "Lift it. Let them see who speaks." Margaret obeyed. And there she stood, barefaced, unpainted, eyes swollen but fierce. No jewelry adorned her, no silk wrapped her shoulders. Only the plain gown and the voice that rose from her soul. "My name is Margaret Harrow," she said, "daughter of the Duke of Aylesworth, and I come not to accuse but to confess." Even the Queen leaned forward. "I was not kidnapped," Margaret said. "I was sold, not in coin, but in ambition, promised to a man I did not choose, watched by armed guards in a lodge far from my home, drugged when I asked questions, silenced when I resisted." Her voice cracked but did not falter. "Adrian Blackwell risked his life to free me. He bore wounds for my safety. He gave me shelter, not chains. And when I chose not to return, he honored that choice, even when it cost him his name. She turned toward Darnell. He is not the ghost, my lord. You are. A ghost of honor, a shadow of mercy. The chamber trembled with breath held too long. Darnell stepped back, his face pale. The queen stood. Her voice, when it rang through the room, needed no volume. "Let it be written," she said, "that Lord William Darnell, having abused trust and manipulated the crown's peace, is stripped of title and land." Darnell gasped. "Your Majesty—" "Silence," she snapped. "You dare parade pain as virtue. Begone." Guards moved to escort him. He did not fight. The queen turned to the duke, who stood pale and silent in the shadows. "As for the Duke of Aylesworth, he who trades daughters for alliances shall no longer advise the crown. Let his lands pass to his wife until his heir proves worthy." Gasps spread anew. The duke bowed, rigid and broken, and finally Elizabeth looked to Adrian. "Captain Blackwell," she said, "you are pardoned." Adrian bowed, his eyes briefly flickering toward Margaret. She took one step closer. Just one. Not a word passed between them. But in that gaze was the promise of something rebuilt, not from status or safety, but from the ashes of truth. The trial was over, but the story had only just begun. London had never seemed so quiet, not even in the dead of winter or in the moments just before the Queen's procession passed. There was a hush now that clung to the air like coal dust, heavy and unmoved by wind or word. Lady Margaret Harrow walked through the streets with her chin lifted and her steps measured. But no one greeted her, not the lace-gloved ladies outside haberdasheries, not the Viscount's wives she had once dined beside at royal suppers, not even the governesses who used to nod politely when passing with their charges. Her name had been cleared. Her truth had been spoken in the Queen's own chamber, but scandal once tasted left its stain. And Margaret, though free, now stood beyond the gilded margins of polite society. She wore no colours now, only muted greys and soft blues. Not from shame, but from clarity. The silks and jewels of her girlhood no longer fit the woman she had become. Within Whitehall, no further judgment had been spoken, but outside, judgment was everywhere. In the eyes that turned away, in the invitations that never came, in the sudden silences that bloomed like frost around her name. And so she kept to herself. She spent her days at the monastery, helping Brother Thomas mend books in the tiny library, or preparing herbal mixtures for women who came to the chapel door with more pain than coin. The quiet soothed her, the labor steadied her, but the ache remained. Not the ache of scandal, the ache of absence. Adrian had not spoken of leaving, not aloud, but she saw it in the way he moved. Restless, unfinished. He paced more than he walked. He watched the sky with a soldier's eyes. He folded and refolded his few belongings, hands twitching at the seams. One morning, she found him in the garden behind the chapel, staring out over the low wall that marked the edge of the monastery grounds. His coat was worn at the shoulders, and his right hand rested lightly on the hilt of his dagger, though there was no danger, only wind. Margaret stood a few paces behind him, not speaking. The stillness between them was not new. But today it felt like the last page of a book no one dared finish. "I'm going," he said without turning. Her breath caught. "When?" "Before dusk." "Where?" He shook his head. "Does it matter?" She stepped forward. "It matters to me." He turned then. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of choosing. "You deserve more than this," he said. "You deserve banquets and ballrooms, not back doors and half-lit rooms." "I deserve truth," she answered. "And I deserve to choose." He looked at her long and hard. "And if you choose me, you choose exile, you choose whispers, you choose being stared at like a painting hung crooked on a nobleman's wall." "I've already been all of those things," she said softly. "The only difference now is I would not be alone." He looked away, jaw tight. "You don't understand," he muttered. I have nothing. You have everything, Adrian, she said. You have your name, your courage, your loyalty. And you have me, if you want me. He stepped back. You don't know what life would look like outside these walls. I do, she said, because I lived it, because I've stood in the court of a queen and chosen to speak my truth, because I've held your blood in my hands and didn't flinch, because I wake every morning and look for your face before I even open my eyes. She stepped closer, voice trembling but unyielding. If you walk away, I will not chase you. I will not beg. But I will never again let someone make a decision for me. Not you, not my father, not the crown. Adrian closed his eyes. The silence stretched. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to wait. Then, from behind them, footsteps echoed softly on the stone. Margaret turned. Her mother stood at the edge of the path. The Duchess of Aylesworth, cloaked in black with a simple veil over her grey-streaked hair, looked smaller than she once had. But her eyes were bright, with something that no longer resembled fear. She approached slowly. In her hands, she held a small box. I waited too long to act, she said. I watched your life be decided by men who cared only for power. And when I finally found my voice, it was your voice I had to borrow. Margaret said nothing. The Duchess opened the box. Inside was a ring, gold, simple, worn at the edges. This was my mother's. She gave it to me before I was wed. I wore it with pride for a time. And then, with silence, she placed it in Margaret's hand. Do not live as I did. Do not let a title be your cage. Claim your own name. Margaret's throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. The Duchess reached out, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. Then she turned to Adrian. I do not need to forgive you, she said, because you never wronged me. But if you ever leave her without cause, I will become your enemy. Adrian gave a small, reverent nod, and then the Duchess was gone. Margaret looked down at the ring in her hand. She stepped closer to Adrian. I am not a duchess's daughter anymore, she said, and I am not a lady waiting to be chosen. She slipped the ring onto her own finger. I choose you. His breath hitched, and then she reached for him, not with desperation, but with certainty. Their lips met in a kiss lit not by firelight or ceremony, but by the rising dawn that spilled over the garden wall. It was not a kiss of fairy tales. It was a kiss forged from ash and defiance, from truths spoken in the dark, from hands that had pulled each other from the edge. When they pulled apart, neither smiled. Not yet, but their hands remained clasped, and their feet turned not toward the palace, nor the past. They walked together, quietly, into the misted streets of a city that no longer held their future. They did not run, they chose, and somewhere beyond the rising sun, the ghost and the flame vanished into something new. The sky over Suffolk was soft that morning, painted in ash pink and pale gold, as though even the heavens had learned to breathe slower. The fog had lifted just enough to reveal the rows of narrow brick houses that leaned into one another like old friends. The Thames was calm, its waters glinting in broken ribbons between chimneys and rooftops, carrying the scent of coal smoke and distant bread ovens. Near the edge of the neighborhood, on a quiet lane, paved in uneven stones, stood a house unlike the others. It was neither grand nor imposing. Its brick walls were modest, its windows plain, but from within it came the hum of voices, of laughter, of life. A small iron plaque by the gate bore a name in hand-engraved letters, the Harrow Flame inside. The halls smelled of ink and candle wax, of dried lavender and old paper. Every room held the quiet rhythm of learning, of healing, of beginning again. In the front parlor, Margaret stood before a group of women seated on wooden benches, each with a slate in her lap and charcoal dust on her fingers. She moved slowly among them, correcting letters, praising effort, pointing to shapes with gentle firmness. She no longer wore silk. Her gown was cotton, sky blue with a white collar stitched by hand. Her hair was pinned back simply, a few loose strands brushing her cheeks as she bent to offer a word of encouragement. One of the women, older than the rest, paused and looked up. "Miss Margaret," she said quietly, "you read like someone born to it. Was it your mother who taught you?" Margaret smiled, a distant sadness warming her voice. "My mother taught me silence. Books taught me to speak." She returned to the blackboard. The sentence she had written remained there in chalk, careful and clear. "Knowledge is a flame that does not burn, but lights." At the back of the room, a small child peeked in and waved. Margaret turned. "Yes, Thomas?" "It's the boys," he said. "They're at it again." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Again?" He nodded solemnly. "Sticks and all." She suppressed a smile and handed her chalk to one of the older women. "Finish the sentence, if you please. I trust you all not to let the fire go out." Outside, the courtyard was a burst of laughter and dust. 6 boys, all under the age of 10, circled around a tall figure with a wooden sword in one hand and a rolled-up kerchief tied around his injured arm. Adrian Blackwell moved with ease, ducking, parrying, letting the children believe they were nearly as fast as him. His boots were scuffed, his sleeves rolled. He had healed, but the limp in his left leg remained, faint but permanent, a quiet reminder of what he had endured and survived. "Rule number 1, he called as one boy lunged with a wild swing. "Never turn your back unless you're willing to be chased." He turned on his heel, and the boys squealed with delight, scattering like sparrows. From the doorway, Margaret leaned against the frame, arms folded. "Are you recruiting soldiers again?" she asked. Adrian turned, pushing hair from his brow. "No, shepherds, but they insist on being wolves." She walked down the steps and reached for a linen cloth, gently dabbing the sweat from his brow. The boys watched in exaggerated horror, groaning at the display of affection. Adrian grinned. "Back to the line, scoundrels. 5 more laps or no bread at supper." Groaning theatrically, the boys ran. Margaret sat beside him on the stone bench. For a moment they said nothing. The sun had begun to warm the courtyard, casting dappled light through the grapevine that curled over the trellis. "Brother Thomas is asking for you," she said gently. Adrian's face softened. "He's worse today?" Margaret nodded. Adrian rose, wiping his hands. "I'll go." He disappeared inside, boots quiet against the wood floor. Margaret stayed, watching the boys. A breeze passed over the courtyard, lifting the edges of her skirt. In her lap, the ring her mother had given her glinted in the sunlight. She wore it on a ribbon now, tied at her wrist, not as a vow, as a reminder. Inside the house, the upper chamber had been turned into a room of stillness and prayer. A crucifix hung above the hearth. The shutters were half closed against the light. Brother Thomas lay in a bed of linen and wool, his face pale but serene. He no longer spoke much. His voice had grown thinner with each passing week, but when Adrian entered, he smiled. "You look like a man who belongs somewhere," the old monk said, breath catching on each syllable. Adrian sat by the bed, his voice low. "You said I'd never stop running." Thomas chuckled faintly. "I was wrong. I never thanked you." "You don't need to," the monk whispered. "You chose something better than revenge." He looked toward the door. "And she carries the flame." Adrian's throat tightened. He bowed his head, pressing Thomas's hand to his own. "I will keep it burning," he said. By late afternoon, the house settled into its gentle hush. Meals had been served. Slates had been wiped clean. The children's shoes lay drying near the door. Margaret sat in the reading room with 2 girls at her side, helping them trace their names for the first time. Adrian stood at the window, watching the street, and then he saw it. A royal carriage, modest in size but unmistakable in its deep green enamel and gold wheels, glided past the house. The guard did not shout. No trumpet called. But inside, behind the drawn curtain, sat Queen Elizabeth. She looked straight ahead, but as the house came into view, her gaze shifted. She saw them, saw Margaret with chalk-dusted hands leaning over a book. saw Adrian beside the window, his shoulder bowed slightly from the old wound. And as the carriage rolled forward, the Queen gave the smallest nod, not of command, not of approval, of recognition. Then she was gone. Adrian said nothing. But when Margaret looked up and met his eyes, she understood. They had not reclaimed a title. They had built a life. At sunset, the courtyard filled with quiet music. One of the boys played a reed flute. The others danced in a crooked circle, laughing, chasing shadows. Margaret and Adrian stood by the doorway, watching them. "Do you think they'll remember this place?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And if they don't, they'll carry what it gave them." "What did it give you?" she asked, turning to him. He looked at her, eyes steady. "You." She reached for his hand. Their fingers laced without ceremony. Behind them, the house glowed with candlelight, and above the door, engraved in quiet, defiant letters, the name remained: the Harrow Flame. Not a house of legacy, not a home of nobility, but a sanctuary built not on power, but on purpose, and love chosen freely, forever. Epilogue. 5 years after the flame. The winter of 1598 settled gently over Suffolk, with snow that fell in soft drifts upon rooftops and whispered through the alleyways like forgotten prayers. The world had grown colder in many ways, but inside the small brick house marked by a plaque reading "The Harrow Flame," warmth bloomed like spring held captive behind walls. 5 years had passed since Margaret Harrow had stood in a courtroom and set herself ablaze, not in fury, but in truth. 5 years since Adrian Blackwell had stepped into the world again, not as a ghost, but as a man reclaimed by love. Time had worn new lines into their lives, but none had dulled the fire between them. The house had grown. The courtyard now bore an iron fence draped in ivy. The back garden had been turned into rows of herbs and vegetables, and the attic, once a cold, forgotten space, was now a nursery filled with lullabies and the scent of rosemary and milk. Their daughter, Eleanor, had just turned 3. She had Adrian's quiet eyes and Margaret's untamable spirit. She rarely walked. She danced, ran, climbed. At night, she slept curled between volumes of poetry and her father's old dagger, which she'd claimed as a toy before she could speak. Margaret had given birth on a stormy spring night, gripping Adrian's hand as thunder cracked over the roof. She had not screamed. She had whispered her daughter's name over and over like a prayer, as if she knew already that the world would one day need to remember her. Now, Eleanor was the heart of their home, and the soul of its mischief. Brother Thomas had passed on the second winter, with Margaret at one side of the bed and Adrian at the other. His final words had been a blessing, not to God, but to them. Keep the flame. They had. They always would. Margaret still taught each morning, her lessons growing with the women she served. She now had more books than she had shelves, and more students than she had time. Letters arrived weekly, addressed to Mistress Margaret Blackwell, seeking her guidance from far beyond London's southern walls. Some came from widows, hoping to learn to read their husbands' wills. Some from girls who dreamed of writing their own. Adrian no longer trained boys to fight. He trained them to stand. Some learned swordsmanship. Others learned how to mend, how to protect, how to forgive. And when Queen Elizabeth issued a quiet pardon for soldiers once forgotten by war, it was Adrian she summoned, discreetly, to help rebuild the honor of those the crown had long ignored. Though their house never bore a title, the Queen's small nod from 5 years prior had grown into a legacy. Not spoken of at court, but carried in whispers through alleyways, into taverns, through the walls of orphanages and the cellars of women's houses. The Harrow Flame saves who the crown forgets. Even the Duchess, now living quietly in Kent under her maiden name, sent letters each month to her granddaughter, each one sealed with a rose-shaped wax stamp and a pressed flower from the estate she now tended with her own hands. She had found peace at last, not through status, but through solitude and the letters that gave her back her voice. But not all fates had found peace. The Duke of Aylesworth, disgraced and dismissed, had died a bitter man in a rented manor near York, surrounded not by family, but by silence. He had never asked for forgiveness, nor had it ever been offered. Lord Darnell, stripped of land and title, had vanished from England's shores shortly after the trial. Rumours placed him in Spain. Others claimed Venice. None mattered. His story had ended the moment he tried to own a woman who had already freed herself. As for Margaret and Adrian, they had grown into their love not like fire, but like roots, quiet, deep, unshakable. There were nights when Margaret still awoke in a sweat, haunted by the memory of the hunting lodge or the courtroom's suffocating air, but Adrian's arms, always steady, would find her. There were days when Adrian walked with pain in his shoulder, a reminder of the blade that nearly ended him. But Margaret's voice, reading aloud from some forgotten poem or letter, always pulled him back. They did not dance at court, but they danced in the kitchen. They did not wear crowns, but they wore rings, hers on a chain, his on a finger, and they meant more than gold ever could. One morning, as snow began to fall, Margaret stepped out into the courtyard with Eleanor in her arms. The little girl's curls were wild and her cheeks pink from sleep. Adrian stood near the gate, holding a bundle of firewood, watching mother and daughter with an expression that still stole Margaret's breath, even after all these years. "Tell me a story, Mama," Eleanor begged, wrapping her arms around Margaret's neck. Margaret smiled. "A story?" Eleanor nodded eagerly. "Then I'll tell you one about a lady who refused to disappear, and a man who walked through fire to find her." Adrian looked over, brow raised. "Is that how you're telling it now?" Margaret laughed. "History belongs to the storytellers, my love." She looked out beyond the courtyard gate. Snow danced on the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. And within that small brick house, lit by the laughter of children, warmed by the fire of purpose, and kept alive by a love forged not in comfort, but in courage, the Harrow flame burned on, not as a place, but as a promise, forever. And so, the flame endures. Margaret and Adrian's story reminds us that love is not always adorned in velvet and gold. Sometimes it is stitched quietly into the corners of sacrifice, of truth spoken in trembling voices, of hands held in defiance of a world that would rather see them apart. This tale is not just about romance, it is about courage, about choosing one's path even when it leads away from everything familiar, about lighting a fire not for grandeur, but for purpose, a fire that warms others, a flame that never burns out. If you felt your heart stir while watching this story unfold, we invite you to share your thoughts below. What moment moved you most? What part of Margaret or Adrian lives inside you? And if you've journeyed with us until this very last moment, write the word flame in the comments. That one word will tell us who carried the torch with us all the way to the end. You are the heart of this channel. If our stories have touched you, and if you're in a position to help keep them alive, we humbly welcome your super thanks on YouTube. Whatever amount feels right to you. Every gesture, no matter the size, helps our small team continue creating these timeless journeys. But if supporting financially isn't possible, know that you still have great power. Share this video with someone who loves historical romance, someone who believes in love that endures beyond scandal, beyond loss, beyond fear. That too keeps the flame alive. And before you go, don't miss the other stories waiting in the cards, stories of bold heroines, forbidden desires, second chances, and love that defies every expectation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for keeping the Harrow flame burning. We'll see you in the next story.